This week on Government Matters.
The fact that people don't really know what they have and how to secure it is an issue.
The federal government launched a cloud-first strategy more than 4 years ago. Today, most agencies still don't have the in-house expertise to pull it off.
This is about understanding where your data is, who has access to it, and what they're doing with it, and that's a much more difficult problem.
The number of data breaches and cyber incidents carried out by insiders is staggering. A progress report 2 years after Edward Snowden.
The profitability of this industry is really suffering.
A new fiscal year approaches and there's cause for concern. Important trends from 3 new surveys on cloud computing, insider threats, and the bottom line. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
To our viewers around the world on the American Forces Network and here in the nation's capital, thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every week we'll bring you the top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. The number of millennials working in government is dangerously low. According to the Partnership for Public Service, less than 1% of federal employees are under the age of 25. It's a generational challenge with no easy solution. Today, HR executives have more tools at their fingertips as agencies turn to big data analysis for help. Diane Cho has more.
In government, the traditional hiring process is no more. Forget the days of simply reviewing a paper resume. Big data is a bigger part of the game to get new hires in the door faster than before, at least anyway for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. I think that the government recruitment process is very cumbersome with regards to the rules and regulations, and they're somewhat unavoidable. I think what we're trying to do is move the process online and give the tools based on data to be able to look for where there's areas of improvement.
Australian-based company Ascendre, formerly NGA.net, partnered with the USDA to form One USDA and standardize its human resources enterprise systems across 29 agencies. Now Ascendre's e-recruit software uses data to drive better personnel decisions across government.
They have been able to minimize many of the systems that they were using, redundant systems, by increasing the capability that they've got with ours.
Today, hiring managers at USDA can see information such as where the applicants are coming from geographically or where the hires are taking place.
So in this example, it would be perfect to see that within New Orleans and Washington, D.C., they've had success recruiting in these areas, so maybe to try targeting their recruiting efforts there.
Sagar Thacker, the director of Deloitte's Greenhouse, says companies are moving away from traditional filters on a resume such as education and GPA, instead focusing on how a candidate might fit into an organization's culture.
What analytics is actually revealing for some companies is those factors are actually not predictive of employees that will either be high performing.
As for what's next, well, Thacker says it's already happening.
Organizations are now using analytics to take a look at, for an individual, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and how do we couple that individual and put them in a team that they can perform well.
For the Government Matters team, I'm Diane Cho.
More layoffs at Hewlett-Packard. In 2012, the company fired 55,000 people. Now, HP plans to cut as many as 30,000 more, mostly from its enterprise division. CEO Meg Whitman says the new job cuts are part of HP's split into 2 publicly traded companies, and the downsizing will eliminate the need for any future corporate restructuring. Whitman was hired in 2011. She presided over both rounds of layoffs. Computer World reports HP revenue was down 8% last quarter. The FBI has issued a public service announcement about the Internet of Things. That's any object or device connected to the Internet. Officials say cyber criminals can exploit those devices. They want companies and the general public to be aware. The FBI released a list. It includes HVAC systems, security alarms, medical devices, wearables, and smart appliances. Their advice? Avoid default passwords or open wireless connections. They can make you an easy target. Let's take a look now at contracting headlines. FireEye reports a sophisticated cyber attack targeting Cisco routers has been detected in more than a dozen countries. The implant, dubbed Sinful Knock, appears to be spreading. FireEye says it was probably created by a nation state. Next, Gov reports the contracting vehicle designed to help agencies buy agile development services hit its first roadblock. The blanket purchase agreement awarded by GSA received a few protests. In April, President Obama issued an executive order that prohibits federal contractors from discriminating against employees who openly discuss their salaries. The Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs just made it official. A final rule was published September 11th. In Tech Matters, a progress report on cloud computing in the federal government. The Office of Management and Budget rolled out a cloud-first strategy more than 4 years ago. But a new survey by Fierce Government IT and Market Connections pinpoints a few growing pains. For more, I'm joined by Molly B. Walker, Executive Editor of Government at Fierce Markets. Molly, it's no secret government needs more technologists, but this passage surprised me. Only 30% of respondents said they have the right in-house expertise between the IT and procurement staff to effectively buy a cloud service. 60% said they're either unable to acquire a cloud solution, even though they may have the right resources in-house or need outside help. Now, what kind of impact is that having, and are there any simple fixes?
Well, it clearly is having an impact on cloud computing adoption. The issue is that contracting officers are not necessarily IT specialists, especially for something as complex as a cloud computing solution. And IT specialists aren't the best at purchasing. So therein lies the problem. It's not a great combo, but our survey shows that it is a pretty common combination. As for quick fixes, the Obama administration has done a lot to try and bolster the acquisition workforce through training, more guidance, things like that. But there are some concerns that some of the efforts that would possibly pull acquisition workers into sort of a centralized procurement area could separate them further from the IT programs that they're working on, which could be an issue.
Now, nearly 3 in 4 of your respondents said the biggest obstacle to shifting services to the cloud is assessing risk. Explain that.
Well, many would consider risk assessment almost the first step to cloud migration. Understanding what you have is important before you know how you want to protect it and move it to a new technology. So a technology that is maybe public-facing and less sensitive could move to a public commercial cloud. The fact that people don't really know what they have and how to secure it is an issue.
Now, last week, the Government Accountability Office published a report about the cost savings tied to cloud computing and data center consolidation. Here's an excerpt. 24 of the 26 federal agencies participating in OMB's IT reform initiatives reported achieving an estimated total of $3.6 billion in cost savings and avoidances between fiscal years 2011 and 2014. Now, Molly, that's a significant chunk of change. Based on your findings, do you expect that trend to continue?
I do. I think it's hard to deny the cost savings opportunities and the mission capabilities that are afforded by the cloud. However, our survey does show that it is mostly cultural and management operational issues that are really delaying agencies' ability to get on board.
Now, let's get to the elephant in the room here. FedRAMP, the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. It's certainly been revolutionary, but federal IT pros have a few gripes. Why?
Well, their main complaint is speed. Most of the authorizations have come through the Joint Authorization Board, which is run by the Homeland Security Department, the Defense Department, and the General Services Administration. This joint board is kind of bogged down, frankly. It's taking them 10 to 12 months to authorize new cloud services, and their goal when FedRAMP began was 6 months. So Matt Goodrich, who's the director of FedRAMP, has openly said that that is not an acceptable timeline, and that's a core focus for them right now. They have some plans in place to speed things up, and hopefully they'll be successful with that.
All right, Molly B. Walker, Executive Editor of Government at Fierce Markets. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Keep it right here. We'll turn from tech to security straight ahead on Government Matters. Edward Snowden forced lawmakers and federal agencies to face the growing insider threat, but a new report finds they have a long way to go. We continue our special look at trends in the federal marketplace next. In Security Matters, Inside Job, the Federal Insider Threat Report. That's the title of a new survey conducted by MeriTalk. It covers the growing challenge of data breaches and cyber incidents carried out by insiders. Joining me with the latest is Dan Verton, executive editor at MeriTalk. Dan, I'd like to start with some figures from your survey. In the past year, 45% of federal IT managers say their agency has been a target of an insider incident. In the past year, 29% say their agency lost data to an insider incident, and only 39% offer employees annual in-person security training. Put these numbers into context for us.
That's right, Morris. Basically what this tells me is that we have a long way to go still, even decades after some of the initial lessons that we've learned in terms of the insider threat. As you might recall, I wrote a book 10 years ago on the insider threat, and when I look at this, it's really astonishing, these statistics in terms of the number of agencies that still have a long way to go in terms of their employee awareness and training on how to identify and prevent insider threats.
You wrote about it before it was on many people's radars. Now, OMB, led by federal CIO Tony Scott, is well aware of these gaping holes in security. They completed a 30-day cyber sprint this summer. FCW reports a follow-up plan will be announced in the next few weeks. Will it make a difference?
Well, in terms of the insider threat, absolutely not. I mean, this 30-day sprint and the follow-up sprint, while I think it should be applauded, and I think Tony Scott should get a lot of credit for focusing attention on this, that sprint is really focused on basic hygiene and patching technical holes in agency systems and networks. It's really basic fundamental hygiene stuff. It does not even begin to address some of the fundamental foundational elements that go into the insider threat in the government sector.
Why do you think that is?
Well, quite frankly, the government, for whatever reason, takes a long time to learn the lessons of history. And if you look back at this issue, the insider threat to proprietary and classified data in the government, we're talking about a problem that goes back 30 years in terms of IT system insiders, and in that 30 years, we've had 4 national security life-changing events that have shown us exactly what the issues are, and yet this survey is really astonishing in that it shows that 10, 20, 30 years later, we're still dealing with the same issues.
Now, there's an equation in your report that piqued my interest. Unidentified data equals unprotected data. What does that mean?
Well, it's very simple. When you look at what agencies are and aren't doing, there are 4 things that agencies need to know in order to have a basis for an effective insider threat detection program. One is you have to know what data you have. They don't. 2, you have to know what you want to protect. They really don't have an idea about that either. 3, you have to know where it is stored. They don't. 43% in our latest survey said they're not sure exactly where their data is stored and how it is classified. And 4th, you have to know who has access to it. Now, they're getting much better on that 4th element in terms of who has access, but they still have a long way to go.
Dan, it's tough to cover this subject without mentioning Edward Snowden. What kind of impact did he have on the push for insider threat programs?
Well, he had a very particular impact in the system administrator area. So now, after Edward Snowden, it's very difficult for system administrators to go unmonitored and undetected in terms of their manipulation of data. In addition, you no longer see system administrators like Mr. Snowden being given the keys to the kingdom because he had access to everything. But when it comes to the foundational elements of an insider threat program, those problems are still there. For example, Mr. Snowden and some of the other high-profile insiders, they were all loyal, law-abiding employees at the time of hire. So this isn't a case of screening them out. This is about understanding where your data is, who has access to it, and what they're doing with it, and that's a much more difficult problem.
A lot of good insight from Dan Verton, executive editor at MeriTalk. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Morris.
We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters. Shrinking revenue, narrow profit margins, and a growing number of regulations could be the new normal for federal contractors. What's the answer? We continue our special look at trends in the federal marketplace next. In Management Matters, the 2015 Government Contractor Survey. The federal marketplace stands at the threshold of a new fiscal year, and there's cause for concern. Joining me to explain is Richard LaFleur, partner in charge of industries and markets at Grant Thornton. Rich, your survey covered a lot of ground. Let's start with revenue, profit, and employees. What did your survey find?
Morris, it revealed quite a bit of data that paints a picture of an industry that's facing considerable uncertainty. When about 60% of our respondents are indicating that their revenue is decreasing or flat, that paints a picture of a great deal of uncertainty at the top line. For the 40% that are reflecting increases, I would surmise that most of that increase likely comes from mergers and acquisitions. As for profitability, the survey indicates that the profitability of this industry is really suffering. About 52% of the respondents have profit margins before tax and before interest of less than 5%, and over 90% are earning less than 10% profits, indicating to me that this is becoming a commoditized marketplace that needs to innovate.
What about employees, Rich?
In terms of employees, we look quite a bit at things like the Affordable Care Act, at the cost of doing business and providing your employees with substantial and fair benefits. No real great takeaways on that front. I was actually a little surprised to see that the average health care cost revealed in the survey is 1% or 2% less than it was 2 years ago when we ran the survey.
Generally speaking, the companies that responded to your survey did not have good things to say about the Defense Contract Audit Agency or its contracting officers. Why?
Well, Morris, I think there's a great deal of frustration at play. Speaking from my own client base and our client base, we have clients that are trying to get contracts closed out and costs audited from 7 or 8 years ago. I think a great deal of that stems from a labor shortage and a talent shortage within these organizations. I would also say from a procurement officer standpoint that those procurement officers are most likely feeling constrained as well and having a difficult time even carrying out their business as well.
Now, you also noted the detrimental impact of overregulation and that things are poised to get worse. Here's an excerpt from your report. The compliance regulations are about to become more costly and more burdensome to contractors if new regulations proposed by the Department of Labor on May 28, 2015 are incorporated into the federal acquisition regulation. Tell me more.
Well, Morris, there's a great deal more oversight coming surrounding systems. There's six elements of systems audits that are now required. This is on top of an already existing set of requirements that have long existed, and I think the marketplace is really just feeling overburdened and really not feeling that there's a payback or any more value arising from that oversight, and let alone the cost to comply.
Rich, we know there's a lot of uncertainty right now. As we speak, lawmakers are trying to hammer out a budget and avoid another government shutdown. Add to that the possibility of new labor regulations and stock reports that look like printouts from an EKG machine. This could be a nightmare for chief financial officers. How can contractors plan for the future?
Well, right now there's quite a bit out there with just a few days looming towards a potential shutdown. We see our clients doing a lot of scenario planning. Most are prepared to manage their way through the shutdown if it does happen, as they had to several years ago. But I do think that it does, management teams that are sitting still can get caught off guard and actually suffer from a client and a labor shortage standpoint.
Richard LaFleur with Grant Thornton. Good luck to all of us. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Morris.
We'll turn from management to final matters straight ahead. On Tuesday, Pope Francis arrives in Washington for a 3-day visit. Tens of thousands of people will travel to see him. Government will be open, but the outlook for commuters is not so great. So the Office of Personnel Management wants feds to telework. For those who can't, Suzanne Kennedy has the basics.
It will be like a July 4th, a marathon, and an inauguration all rolled into one, and it will take place over the course of 3 workdays. That's how local transportation officials are describing next week's papal visit. So Metro is gearing up, adding additional rail cars to bring the number of cars online to 978. Passengers are being urged to get Smart Trip cards and load them up with enough money to handle a round trip. Service is also being enhanced.
To increase capacity, we'll provide near rush hour service the entire day on Wednesday and through the Pope's departure on Thursday. And there will be no scheduled track work anywhere in the system.
The district's Department of Transportation says vehicle traffic will be significantly affected, with some trips taking more than an hour to an hour and a half longer than normal. 70 key intersections will be impacted, so up to 50 traffic control officers and 70 National Guard personnel could be deployed. Many key roadways will be closed as the Pope moves through the district to 6 different events. The Brookland Metro station will be a choke point on Wednesday, the day of the papal mass. It will be limited to either entry or exit only during different parts of the day. Some users of the station say they just plan to stay home.
And we welcome the Pope. And that's the latest from Washington. Thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. We know your week is filled with other matters. Save this half hour for us.